Okay, so we are reviewing for Module 6. I'm going to do some problems with you, and you're going to do the rest on your own. So the whole first section says to solve the equation by completing the square. Okay, so I don't want you using another method. I want to know that you know how to solve by completing the square. So on your test, some problems will be multiple choice, some problems won't. So the problems that aren't, and you have to show your work, if I say to solve by completing the square, you have to solve it by completing the square or you're not getting credit. Okay? So remember on your notes, when you square a binomial, the result is a perfect square trinomial. So x plus 2, quantity squared, means x plus 2 times x plus 2. When you multiply all of that out, the result is called a perfect square trinomial. Alright? When you're solving by completing the square, you're trying to create a perfect square trinomial. And once I start letting you all, once I finish and let y'all finish the rest, I'll pass back the notes so you'll have your completing the square notes. Okay, of course, if you turn them in. So, the first thing you want to do is if you have a constant on the left side, you want to move it to the right side. Remember, constant is a number that does not have a variable. So that would be x squared plus 16x equals negative 55. Okay? And remember, if a is any number other than 1, at this point you would want to divide every term by a. But since a is 1, if you divide by a, it doesn't make a difference, right? Okay, so next thing we want to do, we need to find something to put in the constant spot, in C spot, to make this a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, that's called completing the square. To complete the square, take whatever your value for b is, divide it by 2, and square it. So in this case, what is b? 16. So we'll take 16, divide that by 2, and square it. 16 divided by 2 is 8. 8 squared is 64. So remember, whatever that number is, you add that number to both sides of the equation, not just the left side. That's what messes people up. Add to both sides of the equation. So we get x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals negative 55 plus 64 is positive 9. So what we've created on the left side should be a perfect square trinomial. If we did it correctly, it will be. Remember, a perfect square trinomial, well, first of all, it's got to be a trinomial. Your first term has to be a perfect square. Your last term has to be a perfect square. C has to be positive. And don't forget, you have to check the middle term as well. What's the square root of the first term? X. What's the square root of the last term? 8. What's x times 8? 8x doubled is that your middle term? Then it's a perfect square trinomial, okay? So if you did it right, it's always going to be. So what you do, you factor your perfect square trinomial, and remember, it's super easy to factor a perfect square trinomial because it has identical factors. So to do that, you make one set of parentheses, and you got to make sure you square it. Whatever the sign of your b term is, that's going to be the sign you put inside parentheses. What's your first term? X. It's the square root of the first term. What's your last term? Nope. 8. It's the square root of 64. And we're not even looking at the right side of the equation. We're only looking at the left side. Okay? And then that 9, you're just going to bring it down. I took the square root of the first term and the square root of the last term. Remember, we spent several days on completing the square. All right, so now we're trying to solve for x. X is inside parentheses that's being squared. What do we do? Square root. And I'm going to take the square root of x plus 8, quantity squared. And on the other side of the equation, don't forget to take the positive and the negative square root of 9. So what's the square root of x plus 8 quantity squared? X plus 8 equals positive, negative, what's the square root of 9? 3. If it's going to be a decimal, then just write the decimal. Just round it, okay? You don't have to leave it in radical form. On the multiple choice parts, I will let you put your answer in decimal form. So I'm going to have two answers here. One will be based on the plus 3 and the minus 3. So at this point, I would write two equations. Set x plus 8 equal to positive 3 in one of them, and set x plus 8 equal to negative 3 in the other one. Don't change the sign of the plus 8, okay? That's not what the plus or minus is with. The plus or minus is with the 3. And then you just solve them individually. And negative 5 and negative 8 should be your answers as long as you did it correct. You won't get extraneous on these.
Wait, what?
Negative 8.
And
Negative 8.
Right.
Yeah, you got me messed up.
negative 3 minus 5.
Negative.
Minus 8.
Minus 8.
Oh,
Minus 8.
okay. I thought y'all were crazy. It was me. So negative 3 minus 8 is negative 11. Sorry about that. Might need to go back, and the notes are still on Edmodo. Go back and watch them if you've forgotten, because we went over it very thoroughly. We took a lot of notes on completing the square. We took very detailed notes on completing the square. We wrote down every step. So like I said, I'll pass these back out to you once I give y'all this work to do on your own. Okay? And if that doesn't help, go back and watch the videos. Okay, 2, 3, and 4 are just like number 1. Number 6, the only difference here, we're still solving by completing the square, but our A is not 1. So I want to do that one with you. But on 1, 2, 3, and 4, A was 1 every time, okay? So let's check number 5. We're still going to start by making sure all constants are on the right side of the equation. So add 11.
So the answer for number 1 was
Negative 5 and negative 11. Two answers. So we have 6a squared plus 12a equals 18. So make sure all your constants are on the right. They might already be on the right. If they are, great. Go to the next step. Then, if a is any number other than 1, then you have to divide every single term by a. So 6a squared divided by 6 is a squared plus 2a equals 3. So a is 1, our constants are on the right. So now we got to figure out what constant are we going to put over here on the left to create a perfect square trinomial. When you that process called completing the square. Okay, so now we complete the square. complete the square. To do that, you take your value of b, divide it by 2, and square it. In this case, what is b?
2.
So 2 divided by 2, quantity squared. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 squared is 1. Make sure you add 1 to both sides of the equation. So then you have a squared plus 2a plus 1 equals 4. What you have created should be a perfect square trinomial. Meaning, first of all, it's a trinomial. It is. Your first term's a perfect square. It is. Your last term's a perfect square. I'm not looking on the right side of the equal sign. It is. C has to be positive. And you have to check the middle term. What's the square root of the first term? A. What's the square root of the last term? 1. Multiply them together and you get 1a. Double it and you get 2a. As long as that's your middle term, regardless of the sign, because you're always going to get positive, okay? Regardless of the sign, then it is a perfect square trinomial, okay? So to factor your perfect square trinomial, it's two factors that are identical. So that's why we make one set of parentheses and square it. What's my sign going to be? Positive, because it's whatever b is. C is always going to be positive on a perfect square trinomial. The sign you use in the parentheses is the sign of b. What's my first term? A. It's the square root of the first term. What's my last term? 1. It's the square root of the last term. I'm only looking at the left side of the equation, remember. Right on? Crouton. Okay. I'm still trying to solve for A. It's inside parentheses that are being squared. How can I undo that? Square root. So I'll take the square root of A plus 1 quantity squared. Don't forget you take the positive and negative square root of the other side of the equation. The side that doesn't have the variable you're solving for. What's the square root of A plus 1 quantity squared? A plus 1 equals positive or negative. What's the square root of 4? 2. If it's not a perfect square, put in your calculator and round a decimal to at least the tenths place, if not the hundredths place, okay? I'm going to have two answers because this 2 is positive and it's negative. So I'm going to make two equations. One I will set equal to positive 2. And the other one I will set equal to negative 2. And then I just solve them both separately for A. And my answers are positive 1 and negative 3.
I'm having to get it.
You what?
I'm trying to get it now.
Yeah. You do a couple of them, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this. We did.
I wasn't doing this. I had just copied the notes. But
Oh.
now that you're going over it.
Yeah.
I can.
And it is always better. I know it's faster for y'all to copy the notes from somebody else, but it is better to watch the video because you're going to understand a lot better. So if you do get confused, you might want to go home tonight and watch the video. Plus, remember, juniors and seniors on Monday and Tuesday, you'll have extra time to watch video. And if you're in the 9th and 10th grade, you'll either have the morning free or the afternoon free. You can go back and watch the video. Except if you're watching it here and you're on our Wi-Fi, you can't because it's YouTube. You have to use your own data. So if you need to watch it and that's not good for you, then watch it at home when you're on your own Wi-Fi. Yeah. You got to deal with it. We did some like that in the notes. Yeah. So go back and look at the notes. Just fractions. You just do it the same way. You just got a fraction. 7 and 8 on the back. Those are still completing the square. I meant to put 2 more on there that had A was something other than 1. So I'm not gonna make you do that many completing the square. So just mark out 7 and 8. You're welcome. Okay, y'all's favorite. 9 through 14. These are rational equations. Okay. When you're solving rational equations, you want to get rid of your fractions, okay? So to do that, you have to multiply every single term by the least common denominator. Well, before you figure out what the least common denominator is, if any denominator can be factored, you need to do that, okay? So 3x squared plus 4x minus 4, that's a quadratic. I can probably factor that.
Wait, there's 2 of them, so you can do
So
that.
once I do it once, I'll know what they both are, right? 3x minus 2, can that be factored? No, it's linear, meaning x's exponent is 1. That's the highest degree. The only way to factor a linear expression is if there's a GCF. There's not, so I don't have to worry about factoring that. This is the same as this. So once we factor it once, it'll be the same factors for both, right? Yes.
We can't do that one thing that you did before, like where you put the 3x plus 4x minus 4 in parentheses, and then in parentheses 3x minus 2, and then multiply that to every factor.
You can. I mean, either way, really, because once you get to this one, then that's going to cause you more work there. It'll cause you less work up front, but it'll cause you more work here. So if you choose to do it that way, because sometimes it'll make it easier, sometimes it won't. I'm going to go ahead and factor every term because I feel like, I mean, I can factor super fast. So can y'all. You should be able to. So to me, it's no big deal to factor it. You know what I mean? So I'm going to try to factor. And you're going to have, if you want to fit all this on your paper, you're going to have to write small. Factor 3x squared plus 4x minus 4. Is there a greatest common factor?
Nope.
No. So we know A is 3, B is 4, C is negative 4. Also, for the problems, if you do any problems on a separate sheet, on that problem, if you'll write on a separate sheet, because sometimes it's really hard for me to figure out what's where, and that takes a lot of time on my end. So please be organized and tell me what's located where. So make my little T-chart. Already? Seriously? See how fast time went?
No, we need wait.
Need to multiply, find 2 numbers that give you A times C, which is negative 12, and add to give you B. And tomorrow, y'all don't go home and do this tonight, okay? Tomorrow we'll keep on working in class. Yeah, but let me just try to get at least a factor done right now, and then I'll pick up tomorrow. So 2 numbers that multiply together to give you negative 12, add to give you 4 is what? I'm thinking positive 6, negative 2.
Yeah.
Because that'll multiply to give you negative 12, and 6 plus negative 2 gives you positive 4. So our factors are x plus 6 and x minus 2. And will we need to divide and slide? Yes, because A is some number other than 1, right? So I'll try to divide. If I can't divide evenly, I will slide. 6/3, is that divide or slide? Divide, and it gives me x plus 2. Negative 2/3, divide or slide? Slide, because it doesn't reduce evenly. Remember, I mean, it doesn't divide evenly. If it's a slide and I can reduce, I must reduce before I slide. Can I reduce that? No. So slide the 3 on up over in front of the x, and I get 3x minus 2. Notice that's one of your other factors. Okay? So, real quick, what is our least common denominator going to be? X plus 2 and 3x minus 2. So I'm going to rewrite this whole problem with my, instead of in standard form and factored forms, I'm going to do that before I stop this video. And we'll stop here and come back and pick it up tomorrow. Sound good? So again, I'm only talking to fifth period. If you're in first or third, I may not be talking to you because your class is longer. Fifth period tomorrow, because I haven't finished with what I want to review with you. So tomorrow I'll finish reviewing with what I'm doing. So you, fifth period, do not have to do this for homework. Okay?